Hello and welcome to the Deep Dive Perspective. We're going to look at the drums of war, which the US is still beating, primarily focusing on Iran. But of course, Venezuela is in the crosshairs as well, and so too is Lebanon. It seems America wants war. It seems Israel wants America to have war too. With me on the show today, I've got the irrepressible Ehsan Safar-Nejad, political analyst, somebody who focuses on the axis of resistance in West Asia and particularly looks at geopolitics of that region. And I'm going to get straight into it. Ehsan, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for inviting me to your show. It's a pleasure to be here.
The US policy, I mean, there was this talk originally that Donald Trump was a non-war president. I mean, that's what he came in on, the ticket he came in on with his Make America Great Again supporters. By drumbeats of war, not only does it look like it could split his own support at home, but it could spiral into a world war scenario. He wanted a Nobel Prize for all this. Give me your take on American policy currently.
Well, you're absolutely right. US President Donald J. Trump marketed himself in a way as this anti-war president, not just in 2024 election, but also in the election in 2016. Now, with mottos and chantings like drain the swamp and the never-ending wars, he criticized Joe Biden on his attack on Yemen, for example. He said that that's something that can be resolved with just a phone call. So, yes, he had this tendency of talking about those things. But I think that, like with regards to the behavior of the US administration, it's very helpful if we remember what President Putin said. He said that the US presidents, they promise these great things, but then when they go into the office, then these people in black suits come to them, and they say you can't do this, you can't do that, and there has actually been a same kind of narrative being told by the American side. Seemingly, Obama wanted to do some, make some changes, but then different people would tell him, you can't do this, you can't do that. And he got frustrated, and he famously said, what can I do, in a way? That's very famous. I think he wanted to close down Guantanamo Bay. But in general, I'm talking about this very strong and robust kind of bureaucratic structure that United States has, which is oftentimes in I'm a little bit hesitant to use the term deep state, because that's something that has been kind of tainted by some of the conspiracy theories. But it is indeed the case that United States has this very, very robust bureaucratic system in which, National Security Council, different think tanks, and different parts of the military, different alphabet agencies, as I call them, like CIA, and to a certain extent FBI, the institutions that work under the Homeland Secretary, they have a very robust and very important role in determining the US policies. So when another US president comes to power, apart from all the psychological tendencies of individuals, when they see that their ideas are being shut down by their advisors. So, I mean, it's very likely that if you see all of your advisors, all of the people who are in White House are saying that your idea is not a good one, then it becomes even less likely that you do it. Even not considering the bureaucratic structure of the United States, but considering how much of the programs and different projects that these different agencies have, I'm not really surprised by Donald Trump not being able to do what he promised to do. But with regards to Donald Trump, I think that this guy is not like a philosopher or something. I don't think that he has some deeply established doctrine or agenda that he's pursuing. So he just goes with the flow, and He's more of a narcissist who wants to be praised. So if you praise him, basically, you can get him to do your bidding. And we have seen Benjamin Netanyahu actually taking leverage of that characteristic flaw, that flaw in his characteristics, basically.
Well, certainly that kind of narcissism and that character flaw that he has, which makes him prone to being manipulated, I think that's where you're driving the narrative, means that, first of all, the Islamic Republic of Iran essentially stands no chance of persuading him, because he's certainly not going to listen to Iran and its persuasions. In fact, he was busy pretending to negotiate the nuclear situation with Iran to de-escalate and to find some solution. And the next thing we found was that Israel was given the green light with his blessing to bomb Iran, to attack Iran. The 12-day war was carried out. And not only did he allow the Israelis to bomb, and not only did he participate, he's admitted he actually participated in the process for initiating that war, but he also then attacked the nuclear installations. So to what extent is America really also fully responsible for things that are going to happen within that region if the trajectory continues along the lines of a war on Iran?
Well, like if you take into consideration the opinions of people like Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, who was this great intellectual, in my opinion, with regards to understanding what happens in Israel, he believed that it is United States that controls Israel, which is kind of contradictory to what many people think, that it is the Israel that's constantly basically having the leash of United States government or administration in its hand. So, I mean, that's a very plausible theory that people have, that it is basically United States war against Iran rather than Israel's war against Iran. I happen to actually disagree with that opinion, but even for a person like me who disagrees with that, I am willing to say that's a very credible and plausible theory to have. But you're absolutely right. Donald J. Trump uses negotiation as a sort of perfidy, which is obviously illegal under international law. Let's recount the number of times that he pretended that he wanted to negotiate, but then did something else. So if we go back, if you remember, General Soleimani, when he was assassinated by Donald J. Trump, he was actually invited to Iraq in order to basically solve diplomatic problems between Iran and Saudi Arabia. And, many people talk about how it was United States that basically set the trap through the so-called mediation, or like this request of Saudi Arabia to have a meeting to decrease the tension between the two countries. Then we can talk about, the 13th of June attack on Iran, which, I mean, we all know that on 15th of June, Iran and United States were about to have their meeting, negotiation, the next round of negotiation, which Israel attacked Iran. And now Donald J. Trump has actually admitted that he was pretty much in charge of that. Then even during the bombing itself, during the 12-day war itself, he was negotiating with the Iranians through the mediation of Europeans. I don't know if you remember Iranian foreign minister's visit to the European capitals and meeting with the foreign ministers of the European Troika. Back then, Trump was within the war. Before he actually carried out Operation Midnight Hammer, he claimed that he wants to de-escalate, and then proceeded to carry out that attack. And it's not just Iran. It's very important for people to understand that it's not just Iran, and it's with every country. I was listening to Charles Angus, I believe his name was, and he was a member of the Canadian Parliament. He was saying that they were supposed to negotiate with the United States when Donald J. Trump basically turned the table and he started imposing his own tariffs without anything. So it's a pattern of behavior from U.S. president that he promises that he's going to negotiate, find some sort of diplomatic solution, but then he goes on and carries out acts of aggression. Just one final point, because I think that it is very important to address some of the theories that people have, because some people will now say, oh, Trump is a narcissist. He saw Israel attacking Iran, and then he felt that he should, take the credit because it's already done. But no, if you actually read the Israeli outlets like I do, there was actually a committee called the X Committee, which was being held after the Israeli October attack in 2024 on Iran. I think it started in November, and this committee was being held, multiple times in a day. I think for the last 3 months that were leading to the Israeli attack on Iran, the United States President and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, they would have 2 or 3 meetings every single day. And again, this went back to the I think October of 2024. Obviously, the frequency of those meetings varied a little bit, but again, as I mentioned, the 3 to 4 months leading up to the Israeli attack on Iran, they had very regular 2 to 3 meetings every single week, and it was between Trump and Netanyahu, between Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Ron Dremer, Israel Katz, and they were managing this at the utmost higher level. So they were planning for this very thoroughly. And when United States President Donald J. Trump, he says that he was in charge of it, this is not a flamboyant claim. This is not his narcissism that he talks about. This is actually verified long before he confessed it himself, but by the Israeli outlets. So yeah, this is something that happens. United States President uses perfidy, false promise of diplomatic solutions for conflicts and decreasing the tension, but he uses those opportunities in order to take the enemy by surprise.
Well, there used to be the old precedent, which meant US troops were landed in different parts of the world, and they would be the boots on the ground, which would enforce American policy. That was in Vietnam, and I could go on with many other examples, Grenada, many examples there, even in Afghanistan, of course. But of late, what we're seeing is a slight change. That if the US was to continue this drumbeat and actually execute a war, do you think it's likely that US troops would be involved? Because there aren't really that many US troops on the ground, technically. There's probably about 30 or 40,000 by my estimation around West Asia generally in the various bases that they have. But they seem to have more of a penchant for using proxies. So the ISIS brigade, the Al-Qaeda types, the ISIS Khorasan, the Al-Jundullah forces, the PKK, the Azerbaijani link, which is not so hidden anymore because they seem to be arming themselves increasingly. I noticed 9 JC-17s were purchased from Pakistan just recently as well. So to the north of Iran, there's a threat, a problem. There are basically Israeli-controlled neighbors and American-controlled neighbors. Also, Iraq can't be discounted now that Giuliani is totally in his kind of driving seat. There's talk of them joining action in the future against ISIS or Al Qaeda. The irony of an ISIS leader going against his own fellows is not lost on me. But the fact is that ISIS did invade Iraq. They still are there present, thanks to the Americans, and they are an existential threat to Iran as well. And I haven't even, of course, counted what's going on the borders in Afghanistan and Pakistan, all of whom are under the Zio-American, if you like, political and military control, I would say. I'd say as far as, alliances, control, whatever you want to call it. It means that Iran is surrounded. And it means that America could employ this as the way of attacking Iran on the ground, rather than getting US soldiers who seem to be reluctant to even join the army these days. What do you think about that sort of that theory?
Well, I'd like to start from the very beginning of your question. United States is obviously basically deploying the Madman strategy. They're depicting this image of themselves that they're kind of irrational, they're dangerous, and this is not something. Most people think that it is like things like Secretary of War, Department of War. These things don't mean anything. But no, this is actually something that they're doing very deliberately. And it's not based on their stupidity. Look, I think it was Sun Tzu or von Clausewitz. I know that these are two very distinct individuals, but unfortunately, because of the way that I read articles, I don't remember which of them said this. But he basically argues that if you win 100 wars by fighting them, and you win one war without fighting, just through threats and basically showing force, that one victory is more valuable than that 100 other wars that you won. So and that's what United States is doing. United States, by portraying that it is dangerous, it is irrational, and carrying out different strikes on different regions, is trying to win wars without fighting them. Sending troops, it would be much easier for United States to send its soldiers to coffins rather than sending them to Iran. That's Iran, geographically speaking, militarily speaking, is no place for boots on the ground. There is absolutely no solution, no plan, no roadmap for any military to have a ground force invasion of my country. It's impossible. But through, imposing no-fly zones and basically the Libyan model, right? Taking out the air defense systems, imposing no-fly zone over the territorial airspace of the country. As you mentioned, basically provoking these different proxy groups and these different terrorist groups to carry out maybe at first scattered terror attacks throughout the country in order to weaken the security forces of the country. And what we have been seeing very lately, I'm sure that you have seen those ridiculous videos of, the Iranian military is now defecting to the Shah and whatnot. A bunch of AI videos. They're so mind-numbingly dumb that someone actually forgot to remove the logo of Sora artificial intelligence image generator from that photo, and they said, look, they're defecting while having that logo of photo generator on the photo itself. So it's like very mind-numbingly stupid and idiotic. But that's their plan. That's what they did in Syria. They want to replicate it in Iran as well. It's not going to work. But because of the fact that the other alternative route towards conflict is just so stupid and it's very costly, and United States can't just get into any wars like that at this stage when Russia and China are constantly trying to, stand their ground and oppose United States when it comes to their national interests. That model is not going to work for Iran. Direct military invasion of Iran is never going to work. And you actually mentioned the different groups. So this is going to be the second phase of the war. But what remains is that all these different states and these different non-state actors, these terror groups, they kind of know that Iran is still very strong, right? So how they're gonna get these groups to basically carry out this suicide mission is a little bit tricky. And it requires a lot of preparation, a lot of propaganda in the media in order to portray a weak Iranian security force, right? That's why the propaganda, despite the fact that,
Right.
again, it's mind-numbingly obvious to everyone that there is no defection in the Iranian military. I mean, if anything, I've seen some very pissed off military officers that they're very, very angry that these things are being done in a way in their name. But that's not the goal. The goal is not to create a defection. The goal is to portray an image of weak Iranian security force, so that these groups would get the courage of carrying out these attacks inside Iran.
Fascinating. Yeah, a lot of interesting points there, and great pointers for people to do further research. But what I've also been noticing is this major shift. There was a lot of noise in June onwards about another round of attacks on Iran in terms of air sorties, military aircraft from Israel, perhaps other depots that they have around the region. And there was also talk of nuclear, weapons, military ballistic missile strikes, etc. as well. So that was feasible. There's still a chance that could happen, although in our last show you did outline how Iran has been bolstering up its kind of defense systems, and it's been potentially also buying new systems. And there's a hint that the Sukhoi SUs are also from Russia, or also now perhaps in Iran. These are all rumors that have been going around. We can't substantiate them. Well, I can't yet. Maybe you can. But what I found interesting was also that suddenly you saw this drumbeat for war in Lebanon and the situation in Venezuela. There was a huge push by, of course, the American Navy out in the waters of Venezuela, which was really interesting as to why they would suddenly, act over there when they had the situation in Iran and around West Asia to deal with. And of course, Lebanon is a thorn in their sides even now. They've been trying to bully the Hezbollah to hand over their weapons. It's not happened, and the Lebanese establishment hasn't acted on it, nor does it look like it's going to act on it. So they're threatening that Israel will attack Lebanon again. Is this a way of diverting the attention away from any military action against Iran and actually using these as distractions? Or is that a distraction in itself, that to lull Iran into a false sense of security? What do you think?
Well, again, as I mentioned in response to your, I think, first question, I think that the United States is trying to win wars without fighting them. And it truly needs to fight on multiple fronts. It needs to fight in Latin America, in Middle East, in Africa, because direct military conflict with China is not going to work. Direct military conflict with Russia hasn't, I kind of call it direct because, what are we talking about when we say the Ukrainian forces? I think that it's clear to everyone that it's the full might of the NATO is at this point behind Ukrainian forces.
Sure.
So it's not United States. It's not United States proxy anymore in a way. But so when we talk about fighting against Russia, and more importantly, China, which is being considered a sort of peer competitor, you hear that word being thrown out a lot these days, peer competitor. There is actually not much that United States can do with regards to directly fighting China. I don't see. Maybe I'm uneducated about that, but every day I see different things, different improvements in Chinese Navy, Chinese Air Force. We recently had the new Chinese aircraft carrier being kind of introduced in the middle of everything. So every day it becomes less of a possibility that United States would go to a full-on war with China. So what is the plan in order to curtail China? If you want to destroy China, if you want to fight China, my proposal would be, and we're not talking about ethics of things. Please, I mean, I hope that your
Yeah.
audience wouldn't get mad at me. But if I wanted to do that, my suggestion would be that you have to fight China in its sphere of influence, and you have to basically disrupt their supply chain. You have to remove their access to different minerals, different resources in different countries.
Yes.
And how do you do this? Well, by changing the regimes or governments that are sympathetic towards China. But you can't fight all these wars at the same time, right? You can't fight Venezuela, you can't fight Iran, and you can't be present at all times. United States military, the capability of United States military in terms of fighting multiple wars has degraded over the years, and now they have a metric. I forgot the jargon, what the jargon is, but they can now fight 1.5 war in a way, right? So they can't like fight multiple wars. And they really need to do that. They need to disrupt the supply chain of the energy, for example, the energy that China imports in order to tank the manufacturing, in the manufacturing sector in China, because, I mean, the sanctions didn't really work, did they? They actually had the opposite effect. People are now have more confidence in China, because if you go back and you compare the numbers of the tariffs that were imposed in China, China was able to negotiate. That's a very good sign for any investor who wants to invest in a country, or a company that wants to bring the manufacturing its manufacturing lines in another country, outsource them. China is a very safe bet, very attractive bet. It was proven to be because of the tariff war. So that policy hasn't worked. What remains is that you have to prevent them getting, these different resources, because in terms of being resource rich, I'm well aware of the fact that China has like rare earth materials, minerals, and things of that nature. But overall, it's not a super rich country. They need to import minerals and resources in order to have that growth. And that's how you would fight China. But again, as I mentioned, you need to attack multiple countries in order to do so, and that's impossible. So you go and threaten people and deploy this madman doctrine in order to make everyone scared of you and your threats.
Well, I can underline some other conflicts where the US may be clandestinely doing exactly what you're saying, this madman strategy. Eritrea and Ethiopia seem to be being lined up. And Eritrea and Ethiopia were both targets of the United Arab Emirates, another puppet client of the Americans and the Zionists, for taking over ports. Sudan is another one. Of course, you've seen the genocide that's kicked off, and the RSF is clearly funded by the UAE, which is in turn backed by the British and the Americans. They're just putting the UAE up as a front guy. The reality is it's the same old suspects who are undermining Sudan, it seems. So you can see along the African coast, certainly that side of things, that's your hypothesis is pretty much playing out over there as well. And we could go to other sectors of the world. My question really, I guess, is how does the rest of the world stop this? I mean, for the Americans to keep going down this madman strategy, they're going to destabilize economies around the world. They're going to create a state of flux. There's a strong chance that there will be an economic meltdown as a result. Iran has given them one hint just in this past week of the consequences of this strategy by basically pulling up a tanker heading out from the UAE, which belonged to the Azerbaijanis, evidently, carrying petrochemicals, tons of them, and it was supposedly going to Israel. Now, that was another little indication from the Islamic Republic of the power they have over the Hormuz Strait. And you talked about the energy supplies and that being used as one technique for controlling the rest of the world. Well, two can play that game. And of course, if Iran were to completely shut down the Hormuz, that would have a massive effect on the whole global economy. Or if they were selective, like the Yemenis were, selective about which ships could go through the Hormuz. So they would allow Chinese and Russian ships, etc., and others, but they could stop the American ones. And that also could trigger direct war. So this kind of game is very dangerous. Either way, it can end up in being one which will lead to a war, which could lead to an economic meltdown of the whole globe. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, you're right. But here's the thing: we're in a very weird standoff, right? It's not even a Mexican standoff. It's like a much more complicated standoff, and I think that no one really wants to go toe-to-toe with the United States. I mean, yes, the country, for example, with regards to Iran, Iran will remain sovereign and it will not lose its sovereignty, but it will come at a cost. You know, the infrastructure that we have been building throughout the years and decades under sanctions, they will be destroyed. So, I mean, in that sense, you can understand why there is unwillingness for Iran to escalate, right? But I think that when we are talking about like the overall, if you have that bird's eye view of how things are developing, I think that many people don't really understand how important optics are. Just imagine for a moment, if Iran falls, that's a hypothetical, that's a thought exercise. But just imagine Iran collapsing. I don't think that it will, but just imagine. In that scenario, what kind of message would that send to the allies of Russia, China, and the people who are trying to promote a multi-polarity? And what kind of image, what kind of message would that send? I think that people don't understand the importance of creating a united front against United States imperialism, because that's not what we are seeing today. I mean, maybe there are things that are happening behind closed doors, but I think that there is not that kind of momentum or energy that needs to exist. You know, if I, God forbid, anything would happen to Iran, and again, I want to make this very clear. I don't think that will happen, the collapse of the Iranian government. Then how would you create incentive to countries that are maybe trying to decide between the Western Bloc and the Eastern Bloc about joining the multi-polarity, so to speak, if they're gonna because not that many countries have the Iranian missile defensive systems, right? So how are you trying to convince them to join your cause? I think that the solution to stopping United States and NATO in general is to create a united front. Many people talk about how, I mean, the term vassal state is a term that we use in order to humiliate, mock, and ridicule the European countries in certain ways. But I have this tendency of trying to look at the positive side of different phenomena as well. The European countries playing that kind of role of vassal states overall makes the weight and the power of the Western Bloc much more, because they have a united leader, they have these countries that fall in line, So if it's any agenda that they're pursuing, they're willing to pay the price. Meanwhile, you have these different countries on the side of so-called multi-polarity that show hesitation, and on the other side, in the European camp, you see that the way that they're justifying it is that they say, we're fighting for the posterity, we're fighting for the future generation. It doesn't matter if right now you have to pay like this amount of euro to pay your electricity bill or something like that. We're fighting this war for the long-term prosperity of our country. That's the opinion that they have. And I think that by adopting this vessel state rhetoric, that I mean, I use it as well, but it sometimes people might turn a blind eye to the fact that they have a very strong kind of syndicate that is pursuing something. So in that sense, how are these different countries supposed to actually stand up to United States imperialism? Yes, it is true that if Iran closes down the Strait of Hormuz, it will have devastating effect on the world's economy. But guess what? The Europeans are so crazy that they were willing to see United States blow up Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 pipeline.
Yeah, good point.
And they didn't do anything. So what makes people think that it's one of those classic situations that I think that the Europeans are now thinking that it's too late for them to actually abandon United States. It's too late for them because they have already lost that. So what's another concession for them to make against for United States, and at the end basically spoil the loots of wars, so to speak. So in that sense, I don't think that's as strong of a deterrence for like the countries in West or United States to actually not attack Iran.
Yeah, you make a good point there about vassal statedom and the confidence of smaller nations or the multipolarity bloc, if you like, to stand up to America and believe that they can actually win. They can actually create alternatives. Post-Second World War, we saw the victors, and the victors were the Americans and the Allies in general, the Russians. We saw the development of all the international bodies that we know well now, the evolution of even the World Bank, the World Trade Organization, the United Nations, AIEA, the WHO, you name it, it's all actually constructed by the victors of the Second World War. And they built them so that they would not necessarily bring peace and goodwill around the world, but they built them in order to consolidate their own power and control over the world. This is a reality. This week we saw again the UN General Security Council, or rather the UN Security Council, vote for Trump's Gaza plan. So you can see that clearly there must be quite a lot of nations who are sitting there on that Security Council, because the Chinese and the Russians abstained. They didn't even vote against it. They abstained. And they ended up with a majority vote which said Trump could go in, basically do what he likes in Gaza, essentially. That shows you the level of power and control that the dollar still has over the world, and they exercise alongside it the shotgun to the head, which is terrorism. That if you don't comply with the Americans, they will come in and either balkanize you, send in terrorists, disrupt your economy, get rid of the leader, create color revolutions. They've got a whole bag of tricks that they roll out every time. Is that what actually these nations are scared of? And in return, they're not sure that the Chinese and Russians would come in and perhaps back them and support them. I mean, that's where we're at, isn't it? If we're going to create an alternative, more peaceful, more sane world, one which can push back and perhaps sanction sanction the Americans, sanction Europeans, rather than it being the other way around, then there needs to be a backbone. That seems to be what you were saying. And in conclusion, I think as a way forward, what's your sort of crystal ball, and what's your desire, what's your vision for how things could be, other than this bullying mafia-style imperialist military industrial complex, which constantly just kicks everybody into line if they're not doing what they're told?
Well, with regards to why these countries behave this way, I'd like to first explain something that I've talked about in other interviews, but basically I think that boils down to the mentality of the leaders of the Eastern Bloc or Global South maybe, versus the mentality of the leaders in Western world. We play the game of politics as if it's chess, and they play it as poker. For years, I said that as a point of pride for myself and my country, that look, we're playing it very cautiously, and we're very cognizant of what's going to happen, and every decision that we make is meticulous. But in recent years, and by observing the pattern of behavior by Israel, I've come to the conclusion that there is a benefit to playing the game of politics the way that the Westerners do, which is playing it as if it's a poker. With a good bluff, you can go a long way. You can go a long way, yes. Playing chess is kind of about minimizing the risk and minimizing all the different losses. But in poker, you gamble big, you go big, or you go home broke, right? Like that's the mentality behind behind playing poker. And in certain cases, it actually works very good. When it works, where it functions the way that the person who is applying it wants it to function, you will be left with great loot. So that there's that kind of mentality. These countries on the global south, they have this mentality that United States is a dying empire. And it is. You can go back and watch the presidential debates in 2016 and like the speeches given by Bernie Sanders, different people, Andrew Yang, and you can see to what extent we are seeing the unfolding of those things and then compare it to what you have seen today. So the mentality on this side, on the global south side, on the multi-polarity side, is that we're going to wait it out. We're going to wait out until the United States collapse. But what they lack in their analysis is that they don't take into account that a wounded animal is very dangerous. They don't take that into consideration, that there is a sort of psychological aspect to defining and analyzing the behavior of a power that is declining, and they should be mindful of that. So in that sense, you see them not being able to leverage the power that they have, because the mentality is that this is working, we're making progress, we're not going to gamble it on anything, right? So that's the mentality. For what I hope to happen in future versus what I expect to happen, I don't think that until United States basically get a bloody nose, I don't think that they're gonna stop. Like this basically, when you think about the way that these people think United States would just fall into line and accept the fact that it's no longer the hegemon of the world, I kind of have a very hard time understanding that mentality. I don't think that United States is going to go without a fight. I think that it will take a very drastic measures as opposed to the empires before it, like United Kingdom or the Spanish Empire. I think that they're gonna behave very, very differently. So in that sense, what I want to see versus what I expect to happen is very different. I distinctly remember when the war between Russia and Ukraine happened. some people in Iran, they were thinking, okay, now United States and NATO is busy with Russia, and we're going to get a breathing room and we're going to have potential to grow. And the Iranian leader, this person who was talking about multi-polarity when no one knew what it is. I mean, he was using different rhetoric, but he was like way ahead of everyone else. He gave a speech that actually shocked many of us. He said, if that is the case, I will see a very, very tough road ahead. And I will see lots of wars and destruction throughout the world. And, you know, fast forward to 2025, on the hindsight, he was precisely right about everything. So, like, I can only see more death and this. I'm sorry to be so gloomy, but I only see more death, destruction, more wars, and more United States, as they call it, kinetic strikes, which is like acts of terrorism, bare naked acts of terrorism by United States all over the world. And but I don't think that United States is going to win this war, mainly due to the fact that when you look at the U.S. Governmental officials, they know what the problem is. Like, it's not just me and you who know about the precarious situation that dollar is as the world's reserve currency. A few years ago, Secretary of State, now Secretary of State, Marco Rubio talked about how if dollar loses its status as world's reserve currency, it's gonna have a devastating effect on United States. Same thing with Donald Trump as well. But then you when you compare those statements, which are accurate in terms of determining the main root cause of the problem, outsourcing of jobs, basically having these never-ending wars. When you compare that to the course of action that they take, you see that even the people who try to modify the behavior or the trajectory which United States is moving on in order to enact change in United States, you see that they're not able to do that and we go back to that concept that we talked about, the fact that the bureaucratic institutions in the United States are just so powerful to the extent that they make changes rather impossible. And with the ever-growing advances that we see from China, Russia, and Iran, let's not forget, like, even though Iran has been attacked, in terms of military power, Iran might be now stronger than before when United States attacked it, because it created some form of urgency and emergency in the Iranian government to take the security aspect of managing the country more seriously, whereas before you would see the Iranian members of parliament would be extremely hesitant to allocate the money that would be necessary for the military budget. They would be hesitant to do that, but now they are doing it more easily because now they have seen the result of US attacks and how, like, Iran, for example, fought for years in Syria, and we defended the country and we had like something like 1,000 martyrs. And now, only in 12 days, by the actions of United States and the genocide state of Israel, we have had 1,000 martyrs, most of them women and children. The super majority of them innocent civilians. So can bring up too many wars that they can't really fight, and that kind of method of sort of threatening other people, that doesn't work. That doesn't seem to work. Venezuelan president Nicolas Maduro has stand his ground against the United States. Yes, they're talking about negotiation, but they haven't been willing to outright make ridiculous concessions that United States wants them to make. So in that sense, I don't see the future bright for United States either. I don't see the future bright for anyone, but it's not going to be bright for United States either. It's just going to be more inflation, more. They're probably going to continue cutting down these social programs that they have in the United States. So the average quality of life of the Americans, the average Americans, is going to degrade. But they're not really concerned about that, and overall, it's not going to.
Well, thank you very much, Ehsan, for a fascinating and thought-provoking analysis. It really runs deep, and I can't say I can contradict a lot of what you said. But if I was to give some hope, well, the reality is that there are two powers, I suspect, which are greater than the US, not just the Chinese or the Russians, but one is God, and the other one is perhaps the transnational corporations themselves, and when you allude to the dollar, a lot depends on what these transnational corporations want to do in the background. And we know that, for instance, Larry Fink and BlackRock have a 70% asset shareholding in China, and they're putting their eggs in various different baskets. The Russians are not without their own oligarchs as well. So not that I want to look to the immoral, quite nasty transnational corporations as our saviors, but certainly the divine, for those who believe in him, he may have something to say in all this. And one can only hope that it's the oppressed that benefit, because what we're seeing around the world is American policy, which essentially is tyrannical. It is saying might is right, and there is no international law that they're going to abide by. They don't need to, and they're going to do exactly what I think you said, which is to try and frighten the whole world into continuing to allow their dominance. But again, let's hope that those two other forces I mentioned, one quite divine and one not so divine, perhaps they might be able to end the misery with a more fair system around the world. A conversation which will run and run, and we will revisit it again. But thank you so much for your time once again. And until the next time we meet, take care. And to the audience, thank you for watching Deep Dive Perspective. Don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to press that like button, and also to essentially share this material, because alternative media needs your support. We can't continue bringing bright voices, real voices like Ehsan Safar-Nejad to you. They often won't be brought, well, they probably won't be bought by mainstream media because they won't like this truth-telling narrative. So unless you back his channel, unless you back our channel, we're not going to be around for very long, are we? And you don't want that. You want us around so we can tell you the truth and educate you. Thank you very much. Goodbye.